I'm Tom. I'm a games journalist. This is actually my third talk at VideoBrains, and it is the first one that is actually... Sorry? Nearly. It's my third talk at VideoBrains, and it's the first one that is actually about video games. So yeah, that's an event for you. Just a quick warning before we start. First off, if you... the slides are actually quite important for this one, so if you can't see them, if you're just listening to me, you're only going to get half of it. Warning. This talk contains spoilers for an optional side quest only available in the co-op mode of Dead Space 3. So if that's important to you, please leave now. For this story, I'm going to take you back in time a little. You see, the origins of this talk are in... How do I do this? There we go. Are in 2012, where it was a heady time. The London Olympics have briefly killed all cynicism in the country for about 2 weeks. The Wii U was released to mass confusion, and a guy was about to make an absolute mint out of a game based on rectangles. Now, one of the more fashionable talking points in games journalism at the time was Dead Space 3, which was about to be released. You see, they decided that the new Dead Space would have co-op in it, and thus many a think piece was born. Can horror games work in co-op was the question. You can see a few of them up here. Now, the general consensus, despite the fact that at least one of those says yes, is no. It couldn't because you know, when you're with friends, you've got a feeling of safety, you've got a feeling of fun, and it kind of undermines all the scary things that are happening. Well, games journalist of 2012, allow me to rebut. Because I know horror games can work in co-op, but to explain why, I have to take you back to 2005. It was a heady time. The BBC had just resurrected Doctor Who. The Xbox 360 had been released a full year before the PS3 to mass confusion, and for some reason we were all obsessed with buying plastic guitars. Now, I was 19 at the time, and in my second year at university, resurrecting a lapsed interest in video games. I'd used my knackered old PC to play of 90s classics, things like the LucasArts adventure games, Deus Ex, and of course, System Shock 2, which is not coming up. There we go. Now, for those among you who are still learning to walk in 2005, System Shock 2 is basically Bioshock, but in space with less polygons and less objectivism. Now, it's a very scary game, which you're probably going to be surprised by when you see what it actually looks like in a second. It takes place on a where something has gone horribly wrong, and if that seems familiar, it's because a lot of games have copied it ever since. I won't delve too much into the plot, but many of the crew appear to have fallen under some kind of mind control, becoming cultists to an entity known as the Many. These crew have been both mutated and cybernetically engineered to become nightmares of flesh and metal. Again, this might seem familiar to you if you played Bioshock, because Ken Levine has been making the same game for about 15 years. Now, those of you who are old enough to remember System Shock 2 are probably asking, System Shock 2 had co-op? Yes. Yes, it did. It wasn't very good. It was terribly buggy, but it did exist. And I decided to play System Shock with 4 buddies, which is an interesting experience for such a scary game. For instance, like Bioshock, you start off with a big wrench and you expect to beat people to death, which, if you're in co-op, looks a bit like this. And that's supposed to be a GIF that plays with that bit in Shaun of the Dead where they run around beating the guy, but it totally hasn't worked. Sorry, that's put me off a bit. Yet the game still scared me. A lot of that is the sound, which I, of course, cannot demonstrate here because we have no sound. Even this guy, again, it doesn't look very scary, but believe me, it is. Even this guy is one of the simplest enemies in the game, has a terrifying groaning sound. And key, you hear him before you see him, which has you wondering exactly when he's going to arrive. And that's horrifying enough before you get to the cyber matrons and the psychic monkeys. Yes, somehow they made the psychic monkey scary, and I'm not entirely sure how they did that, because it sounds ridiculous on the face of it. Now, as the game... So I was playing with some friends, Andrew, Chaz, and Paul. Paul was a huge survival horror fan, so he very much wanted to cut down on the jokes and make sure we enjoyed the terror of the experience, which, to be honest, wasn't that hard. Even with the 4 of us, the game was easy, but the atmosphere was still scary. But as the game went on, it became less easy. Resources got a lot more scarce, enemies became tougher, and we started dying a lot. Except they didn't do that because of anything in the game mechanics. They did it for something else. I didn't find this out until after the game, but Paul was concerned that we were not being sufficiently scared, so he started playing for the other team. Instead of letting me know when he found some ammo for my gun, for example, he would hoard it. And then, when we weren't looking, he would throw it into a toilet. He did the same thing with health packs, literally flushing our precious life energy down the drain. That wasn't all. During combat, he seemed to be joining in, but in retrospect, he was mostly firing dramatically over the heads of the enemies and pretending that he disliked them. Again, we had no idea this was happening until after the game had finished, but things escalated. After a while, just that bit of sabotage wasn't quite enough. So he started to wander off, dawdling, taking some wrong turns, leaving the rest of us alone and isolated and a little bit more vulnerable. In retrospect, he might have been flushing some of our ammo down the toilet when that happened. Then, one night we were playing and had a little bit to drink, we'd been gaming all night, it was getting pretty late, something like 2 a.m, and something else happened. Okay, that was a lot scarier at 2 a.m. when you've been drinking a lot. But nevertheless, they didn't last very long because although that little role-playing episode had worked fine in the middle of the night, the next day when we saw him in class, the spell was kind of broken. Although he continued to sabotage us through the campaign and only fessing up to it all once we'd finished the game, we never really saw this little bit of LARPing again. The whole incident struck a chord with me. It made me wonder about other co-op games where not every player is on your side. What if during the game of Left 4 Dead, someone became infected and you had to debate whether to shoot them or not? What if during a game of Payday the Heist, one of the guys was an undercover cop, trying desperately not to actually shoot anyone and hoping you didn't notice? You know, kind of like a not shit version of No Russian. Betrayal mechanics often come up in board games like Resistance or Werewolf. But they're usually in a comedic atmosphere, or at least a relaxed, informal one. In video games, we have a better ability to kind of set the tone, to create true paranoia, giving us moments a bit like The Thing. And by that I mean the 1982 remake of The Thing, not the 1950s original or the 2000s remake, or the video game based on the 1982 remake, which is flawed but has some interesting ideas. Now, that's the kind of thing I want in games, that feeling of paranoia and distrust. Because when you can't trust your friends, they're no longer reassuring, instead they're intimidating of themselves. Now there's a second part to this tale, and that's that in 2013, Dead Space 3 finally came out. It wasn't very scary. Dead Space never really has been. It's more about jump scares than creeping dread. It's what my friend Ben Barrett refers to as terror games. That's a picture of Ben there. It's still a surprisingly good game, less because of the scares and more because it's very satisfying to shoot the limbs off monsters with ridiculous custom guns. But it also had a secret. Now, you thought I was joking about that spoiler warning before, but here it comes. About halfway through the game, if you're playing in co-op, you get a small side mission. The co-op avatar, a man whose name I do not remember because he has barely any character, notices a figure of a woman in the snow. Following this leads to what seems like a standard room-clearing mission, except there's something odd. Christmas presents start appearing in the corner, and little soldiers, and this. I remarked on this to my co-op partner, also called Tom, and he sounded puzzled. I continued to call out all the weird things I saw for another 20 minutes or so, before eventually he was like, I'm not seeing any of this. You see, I was seeing all these weird objects, mostly Christmas-themed, including these toy soldiers that, to be honest, are scarier than any of the enemies in Dead Space. But he couldn't. It's the weird thing is, we were so vested in the idea that in co-op everyone sees the same world that we didn't realise it was happening, and for quite a while he must have thought I was starting to lose it. This is by design. The story of the mission is about the character who I was playing suffering from some post-traumatic stress. But as and thus as the mission continued, our visions continued to diverge. Tom must have got a very strange version of his tale where he never actually saw any of this stuff happening. He just heard me talking about it to him in voice chat. I'd become the unreliable factor, not through choosing it, as Paul had done, but because I'd been tricked by the game mechanics. Sadly, the mission is short and buried in the middle of an otherwise bombastic action game, so most people don't know about it. It's also not terribly well written. But again, it inspired me. Once again, horror had worked in co-op, and it worked because of deception. I couldn't trust what I was seeing, and my partner couldn't trust me because I was seeing things. So that's the key to horror in co-op. Friends make everything a little less scary because you can rely on them. But if you take that away, they become scarier than most of the monsters we see in games. Take that, 2012 games journalists.